it's that time. I just want to say, and actually I just really want to introduce a man who even Alexander of Macedonia would have referred to as the great Dr. Joseph Kicklighter.
Not bad, not bad. Thank you, everybody. And welcome back to many of you, and welcome to others. I realize for some that first day is an opportunity to decide whether you want to stay or drop. And so I realize the numbers are on me and I'm responsible, so I'm going to do my best. And I have had a New Year's resolution. You know, New Year's resolutions are a time to think about dieting, quitting bad habits. What I'm going to do is announce your break with a cheerful heart. In other words, the letter and the spirit. In the past, it was merely the letter, and I resented it. But now, mark my word, I'm going to be happy about the fact they've got that 5 minutes off. And not merely, sure I will, says Frank. There you go. So I do hope, though, that you will enjoy the class and you'll get an opportunity to look at the book. It's not painful, I promise. And it has really lovely illustrations that will, I think, enhance your reading experience. And some of you have already read the assignment, haven't you? And yes, and you working during break, and that's really good. And I think also you get these great primary sources and descriptions of individuals. So I think it's interesting. And notice first edition because there is a second edition, so they love to raise the prices. And not that much has happened in the world of ancient history. It changes, I promise. There is archaeology, so remember, it does change, but not that big. Not for another $20 or $30, right? So this is the book, and Amazon has it in the first edition, in case you are interested. This course, as you notice, is truly Greco-Roman because we are going to be dealing with the transition, you might say, between the Greeks and the Romans, although some people would think that's only partially true. In fact, we know there were Romans while the individuals that we are going to be discussing today were around. But the difference between this Hellenistic period is that it's almost exclusively in the East. Our friends in the West that we will get to later in this session are not initially affected by what's going on. This is a world that we know today as Iraq, Iran, Turkey, Egypt, that part of the world. And only in the second half of this term will we see it beginning to spread to the West, albeit in some quarters reluctantly, as in, beware the Greeks. The individuals that we know from this period are, and were, legendary, because this session focuses so much on the two, Philip and his son Alexander. Let's face it, had it not been for Alexander, we would probably be spending the whole period on Philip. You have, in the case of these two individuals who, had it not been for Philip's untimely demise, that he might be the hero of the story, but he simply didn't have time. They are responsible, however, for the spreading of Greek civilization, and so the history world created the term Hellenistic. I guess the best translation is Greek-like. Not light, but like, because it is Greek, but it's spread out over various and sundry cultures. And as such, it will be mixed in. And you know, just before I came, I was reading about an area known as Bactria. You may have heard of it, in the East, where a Greco-Buddhist civilization went on. That's something to add to world history classes. I never heard of such a thing until about AD 10. And I just thought that was fascinating to think how far the Greeks had come in. And you know, the Buddhists can bring in just about anybody. So it's amazing to me how far and how vast this Hellenistic experience is going to be. Next week, in fact, we'll be talking about some aspects of the civilization that will be affected. But today, more personalities and wars and how it can. And of course, we think of the pride of the Greeks. And we know how we always talk about how the Greeks felt so very keenly about their independence and their superiority. This gives you a pretty good idea, not total, but a pretty good idea of the vastness of the various city-states, some small, some medium, some large, and how they existed in alliances, but each one was more or less independent. And no one, of course, likes that, at least no one who wants power and control. This is to say, some of you will remember back in November our discussion of the conflict between Athens and Sparta, known as the Peloponnesian War, which essentially wore them out and prevented them from the kind of self-authority and the domination that they wanted. But others were watching. For a time after the Peloponnesian War, stripped of its empire, its navy, more or less demolished, the Athenians just had to hold tight. Remember now, if you want to go back into your Athenian history, remember this is going to be the period of the playwrights, of Socrates. Much is going on from a point of view of the culture. But politically, it's a very difficult time for Athens, and indeed its democracy, because Sparta comes to dominate. The problem is, some will remember that Sparta has problems at home. And Sparta cannot afford to spend all of its efforts more or less keeping the Athenians under control. They try to set up pro-Spartan governments. If you can imagine that among the Athenian people, having some Spartaphiles, Spartan collaborators. Of course, they are definitely not popular, I suspect, among the majority, but it never really works too well, and the Spartans always needing to control those helots. Because when the Spartans are away, the Helots will play. So you cannot risk it. And basically, the Spartans cannot control all this and really don't want to, if you want to know the truth. They just want to be rid of it. We haven't talked much about the city of Thebes, but you can see Thebes north of Athens. It is a major city, home of Oedipus the king, in case you remember that play. And they will have their round of trying to maintain this position of leadership amongst the Greeks. But the fact is, none of these seems to be able, with its resources and its limitations, to do so. And then comes Macedonia, or should we say Macedon, to make it a little easier. Philip II is, as I've said, a monarch who, had he not had his son, would be one of the greatest figures in history. As military leader, as shrewd and cunning, he's the kind of individual Niccolo Machiavelli undoubtedly thought about, because he did know how to manipulate people in Macedon and in Greece as a whole. Many of you will, you'll see Macedonia on the map, up there, and you'll note they are, shall we say, Greek ethnics. But the Greeks of this day and age, the classical period, looked at the Macedonians sometimes the way we do with certain relatives at Thanksgiving. We know they're kin to us, but it's from a very distant branch, very distant. We were talking earlier about the proud community of Wadley. Wadley's a lovely community, and we were talking about living on routes as opposed to having a street address, R-O-U-T-E. And you know how bucolic that seems. But in fact, if you are someone who's from Midtown Athens, such an individual might seem somewhat backward. And I suspect that's the way Athenians felt about Macedonians. They spoke a little Greek, but they didn't speak it well. Occasionally, Macedonia could produce someone who made who's who. I mean, there was Aristotle, after all. He was the son of Philip's father's, the son of Philip's father's doctor. So that's not bad. So, I mean, when you think about one of the greatest philosophers, yes, he did spend a lot of time in Athens and elsewhere, but he had some strong Macedonian roots. Euripides lived up there for a while. So I'm saying there were times when Macedonia had some cultural. Said when they came to the Olympic Games, there was always a sort of, we'll get back to you. You know, when they applied to get in, and, you know, that's hurtful. You know, when they say, we'll get, you know, we appreciate you applying, and we'll keep your, remember, keep your folder on file. Oh, God, that used to kill me. Please. That's the idea. But in any event, Philip, who had been a hostage during wars that Macedonia had with Greek city-states, had more than an inkling of Greek civilization. And I think because he was a great military figure and designed such a great Macedonian army, because he had the resources, people, and he had the tactics and techniques and was aware of their own weakness, he will more or less appoint himself to take on the responsibility of leading the Greeks. Not creating a Greece, mind you. That's not going to happen until the 19th century after Christ. We got a long way for that to happen. But to lead the Greek city-states. Because, of course, we can be united in one thing. And that's what you want to do at rallies. Who do you hate? Give me a P. Right? 6 letters and 2 syllables. That's not a tough one. And you know, it's not like someone said, let me think about that a minute. No, you don't need any time. You're a Greek. You hate Persia, I hate Persia. All Zeus's children hate Persia and love Greece. So you can do that, and it's more or less popular, particularly when Macedonian forces defeat everyone else and the options become increasingly slim. You might say, where is Sparta in all of this? Well, Sparta's not doing well. Glad you asked. Sparta's just not healthy. And you know what happened? Their population was going downhill. I just don't think there were enough men to reproduce. I mean, men were scarce. What they were having to do, I think they were having like talent scouts going out among the Helots and saying, you look good. You know, genetically speaking, you're a fine specimen. How would you like to be a Spartan? He said, well, I love farming, but I don't know. There are a lot of opportunities. You know, they're recruiting. And so some of these Helots then will become Spartans. And then, of course, you know what job number 1 is? Reproduction. Because you got to go make little Spartans. And then you got to go fight. So it's not a pretty picture, and the population is going downhill. So believe it or not, we're going to say goodbye to Sparta. They're not going to play a major role in this, and essentially Philip is going to leave them alone, which I think is just kind of interesting considering the major role they played. Whether or not Philip II in any way resembled the bust, I thought it was a nice one. And he did have that eye issue, which came about from combat. So that is real. That is a fact that he had an eye taken out through warfare. They played rough in those days, right? So he did, however, use his tactical and other military skills to create this great military force, and did the policy that many other great figures in history have used, divide and conquer. And he used it very, very effectively. As people have often said, he's not moral, he's amoral. It's just not an issue of morality or character. It's an issue of gaining and maintaining power. And perhaps as king of Macedon, he was tired of being treated as other people. You know, you're not one of the important Greeks. Whatever the case, he had a lot of motivation. He had a lot of education. And he did have dreams, I think. I don't know how far. We'll never know. But we think at least he wanted the western part of the Persian Empire. Did he want all of what we would call Turkey and maybe Syria? Difficult to say. But whatever the case, he enjoyed an enormous amount of success in his life. Remember, he died in his early 40s. So he accomplished quite a bit for one that age. Now here we come to the problem of what is Macedonia. Let me take you back to 1991. Remember that year? Okay. If I'll remember that, we are aware that was the birth of Macedonia. I'm sure you weren't sitting around thinking about that in 1991. But that is modern day Macedonia. And this is not a lesson on 20th century history, but I will note merely that it had been part of the old Yugoslavia. So let's have a moment of silence in honor of Tito. And so think about the breakup of Yugoslavia and all that that might fascinate. Why these Slavic peoples chose to call themselves Macedonia is best left to another group. I think they're on the waiting list to try to get into NATO. You know, it's so. Thank you for your application. We'll get back to you real soon. Hold your breath. So, as a matter of fact, Macedonia immediately got letters of protest from the government of Greece. How dare you people use the name of Macedonia? This is the truth. Because Macedon was a Greek kingdom. And these folks, so the Greeks said, had no business calling themselves by that. So, there you have a little saga from the 1990s. Now, let's go back to the ancient world. Just thought it was interesting because you see that modern Macedonia has no geographical connection to ancient Macedon because Macedonia is north of that area. Interesting. When we think of stories of childhood and we think of who are heroes, I can do no better than think of Demosthenes. Many of you have read about him in Plutarch's Lives and are aware of how he used the stones because as a boy he had a speech impediment. He became a great orator and Athenian leader. It will be this individual who, in a series of 3 orations called Philippics, orations against King Philip. In other words, it's sort of like an ancient Churchill warning against Hitler in a way. I don't know if either of them would appreciate my analogy, but Demosthenes gained a reputation as being a major Athenian politician and a leader of those in the assembly who believed that this was a major problem, Macedonia, and that if they didn't do something and prepare for it, they would have to deal with the consequences. We know, as a matter of fact, that Cicero and other great speakers use these Philippics in their own orations. I don't know if I'd call it exactly cribbing, but let's just say that they utilize some of the techniques that Demosthenes had used. Demosthenes was an interesting fellow, and later on, at times when things do get very bad, because you imagine he was on Philip's most disliked list, that Demosthenes will, shall we say, reach out to Persians. And you say, oh, I thought we hate Persians. We do, but times we love them. It's a love-hate thing. I think it's very odd to think, though, he might have been a collaborator. But, hey, that's politics. In any event, Demosthenes becomes a major figure in his anti-Macedonian rhetoric. At the same time, there were others. This is an interesting fellow. He's a little older than Demosthenes, by the name of Isocrates. He was a rhetoric teacher, rhetorician. And he's the sort of individual who will be saying, we Greeks, and again, they're not saying, we are the world, we love all people. It's more like, it's all about us. We're great, we're Greeks. But why do we go on hating each other? We need to come together. We need to be as one. Can't we find someone who's Greek who can lead us? Maybe up north. Maybe Philip. It is not fair to say, in my opinion, that he's merely a traitor or anything of the sort. Just looking for someone who has the charisma and the skill to lead. So there have to be individuals in Thebes and Corinth and Athens who are saying, well, maybe he can do it. Maybe we don't have to wait for him to knock all our heads together. Maybe we should just work with him. And if that's collaboration, so be it. But there are others, as you say, who follow the idea of Demosthenes, we must resist Philip at all costs, and others who will follow the idea of Isocrates. And there are other leaders. I'm not saying Philip's the only one. There's a leader of, the city Syracuse on the island of Sicily? Yeah, Greek. And Isocrates mentions him specifically as a possibility, top 10 Greek leaders. But I think when you talk about the finals, this is going to be number one in the finals, as far as Isocrates and people of that sort are concerned. I like my map here because I think it shows you how thorough is the domination that Philip will gain. I didn't like the heading of the map, and I cut it out, because it said empire. I don't think it's an empire. They are not so much added to Macedonia as they're forced into an alliance. Do you want to be destroyed? No, we really don't. Is there a choice? Yeah, we could have an alliance. Would you like that? I mean, that kind of cuts down on your choices and the confusion. You get because these folks get angry and they can make some hurtful decisions. So basically, I don't think they're sort of acquired so much as they are brought together by force. The Battle of Chaeronea, which Demosthenes warned them about by the third Philip, he said, you're going to have to... But it's a question of forming alliance with Thebes and trying to get all their forces together. But it's a question of too little, too late. The Battle of Chaeronea is one of those battles that they always say is one of the most significant battles in ancient history. I guess so, if you look at it from the point of view of the Greeks, because at this point we'll essentially say goodbye to the independent Greek city-states. It's been real. You've had good times, but you blew it. And now somebody else will help you because you showed you're incapable of helping yourself. And who is it going to be? Well, the Macedonians today, and it will be others like Romans tomorrow. Eventually, not in this, here come the Turks, right? So it's really an interesting process if you stop and think about it. Let's just say the Battle of Chaeronea will change the future of classical Greece. And as it does so, here comes the League of Corinth. The League of Corinth is essentially Philip sitting down with spokesmen for all of these different polities there in Midtown Corinth, nice city. And I guess they're all acting sort of like, you got something going, Chief? What is it you want to talk about? Well, of course, he says, you know, I hate Persia. Do you hate Persia? And they say, yeah, we really do. You know, I mean, after he slapped them all around enough, I'd say anything you wanted to hear. How bad do you hate Persia? Ooh, I hate them a lot. Do you want to go beat up on them? Sure do. Well, I'm starting a crusade. You want to come along? We do. This will be the League of Corinth then. It's not a matter of taking over their sovereignty. They are still independent polities, but they are more or less required to be part of this league. Now, but Sparta's purple. I know. Our Helot recruiting kind of got low, so our population, we're not being as fruitful as we had hoped. So, yeah, I mean, they need all those men because, I mean, you know, you've still got this enormous Helot population. And you don't have enough able-bodied Spartan citizens to keep them in line. So, I mean, it's an incredible situation, but he just says, okay, y'all can just be neutral. And they'll say, well, thank you. So, Sparta doesn't play a role. But look at everybody else. And you say, but Epirus, I love the pinstripes. I do too, yeah. I have a shirt like that, as a matter of fact. The idea is that Epirus is going to play an important role. Because, yes, Philip II married someone from Epirus. It was a love. It was a stormy love. It was a passionate love. Yes, Philip did take time off military activities for love. I'm not saying she was the only love, but she was a significant one. She had, would you call it priority? Is that will work? Yeah, priority. A very, very interesting person. Was she involved, as some have said, in her death? Well, we are going to see. But Epirus and the untimely will play one of the roles in the interesting story of Epirus and Macedon. Olympias, nice name, isn't it? Has all kinds of godly connotations. You see, she's not a Macedonian. Does that matter? Well, I'm sure it did to some. But in general, Olympias being married to Philip was considered by, I guess, her father, and perhaps Philip's family, a wonderful political coup. And when Philip and Olympias had a son, known well to all of us as Alexander, the situation seemed very, very successful. Yes, this is a tragic movie. Tragic in every way. I am sure the actors therein are wish they never made it. And I hope you didn't spend any money on it. Let's not talk about that. Val Kilmer's makeup alone would have been just look at it. How much they must have globbed on that man to make him look like Philip. Remember, Val Kilmer used to look nice. Yeah. But, yeah. That. And, of course, Olympias needs no introduction, I'm sure, to those of us who have followed her career. The, shall we call them, trio, have received a lot of publicity, notoriety, because of the special relationship between mother and son. If it is true that she actually told her son that his father was not Philip but was a thunderbolt, yes, would explain a lot. But in fact, Philip claimed to be descended from Hercules, as Olympias would claim to be descended from Achilles. So everybody's got, you know, you'd always want to meet regular folks who just say, yeah, my folks were they just worked, had good jobs. But no, these folks, oh no, well, we were all descended from God. Yeah, thank you very much. So, yeah, so it would explain a lot that was going on. Now, she was the daughter of the king of Epirus, and her brother became king after him. I mention that because Olympias and Philip, in addition to having Alexander, had a daughter. And so Olympias and Philip got the bright idea of playing, I guess you'd say, matchmakers. You know, when you have a daughter, you want her to be happy. And so they say, gosh, who do we know who's really a nice person would be great? Well, it'll be her uncle. Yeah. Yeah. I would say to these people, get out more, don't you think? But I'll let that go. And just note that the daughter married the king of Epirus, and it will be at the wedding reception that, or thereabout, Philip will be assassinated by one of his retinue. Strange, isn't it? Very strange. In any event, we need to back up because Alexander was now a teenager. And in fact, he and his mother may or may not have been acting against his father. This is going to sound like something out of Lifetime or ID, and I apologize for that, but it is quite lurid. Philip, his heart, you know, he fell in love many times. And so he fell in love with a Greek noblewoman this time. I'll give you her name, which will strike you as odd. It's Cleopatra. Not that one, but yeah, I mean, it's just very odd. But he will marry her, and the next thing you know, biology takes in, and she has a little boy. Uh-oh. And, of course, Olympias has a son as well. However, Olympias' son is half Macedonian. And the new son, I believe his name was Philip, was fully Macedonian. Is there a problem? Yes. And this is when many people would say Olympias truly earned her birthday card, because if she was involved in the conspiracy to assassinate her husband, it did clear the way for her son to now become Alexander the Great. Strange story, and it may or may not be true. There are many, the Persians would send a letter, when he died. It's kind of mean, you think it's in flowers or a sympathy card or something like that. But instead they just say, ha ha, we did it. Everybody wants credit, when something like that happens. So they wanted to get credit for it. And Olympias will go on now. I don't think she'll say, well, now, dear, you'll be king. I just want to knit and do crocheting. And, no. Mama is here for you. Yes. You can. It's Mommy Dearest. Don't worry about that. She is serious. So, here we have it. The younger wife, the assassination, the potential rival, and then some cleaning up activities. I guess we could call that cleaning up. We just don't want any more trouble. They would have been unhappy anyway. So, in a way, we're doing them a favor. I think you call it rationalizing, don't you? But it seems to work for them. I guess I'm telling you this because I just don't think that we ever need to think of Alexander as being some sort of saint. If you thought that, I think he was as deep into this as his mother. Not that he did not have an interesting relationship with his father, because he did. His father was a very important influence on him, and he had a great role to play in the development of Alexander as the military genius he was. It is interesting to think that even when he was alive, and remember, Alexander died in his 30s, but he, in fact, we know, was already in a legendary stage. It's amazing to think how many stories were told about him. Our chief source about him is inevitably Plutarch. Plutarch, using a variety of sources, wrote maybe 200 years after the time of Alexander. But he had access to many sources that we do not. As a result of that, we are able to, shall we say, appreciate him in ways that we would like to be able to read for ourselves but cannot. However, Plutarch, originally, when Plutarch was younger, he would write about Alexander as the founder of a new world which had overcome hatred and was basically a philosopher. Alexander was basically a philosopher in action because he brought together people in love and truth. Youthful idealism. Later, Plutarch would change his view of Alexander. But Alexander always had his supporters who always saw him as a military, brilliant individual, but at the same time as someone who could not get enough and didn't know how to quit, to put it mildly. These are some of the many many representations of Alexander, taken, I suspect, from some exhibits I saw years ago at the Metropolitan Museum, of all places. There is an amazing collection, however, none of which are necessarily contemporary with him, but, you know, everybody wants to create images of him, and I'm sure that many people wanted to be him. They mention one famous Roman emperor who, his name was Trajan, and we'll talk about him in the spring. And apparently he was on his way east, you know, trying to get to Persia, and I guess they said, you need to get back home. It was about the 1st century after Christ. He said, okay. And he was so disappointed because he wanted to excel in the areas that Alexander had. And so it's like, you know, leave and sing to dream the impossible dream or something like that. It's very upsetting for this great Roman emperor. I'm told by Sir Frank that you are now entitled, I'm going to be happy. You get a break now. I want everybody to enjoy your break. New Year's resolution. So part of 2018, be happy, enjoy. Yeah. Harsh. That's 2017 talk. We're on, this is all new. This is the warm and friendly. But yeah. You believe that, right? Sure. Yeah, like he had good days too. I'm sure. Yeah. But we are back to Alexander and the many views of Alexander and all the legends that encompass his life, his short life, which lasted until, 33. So he had a lot to accomplish in a very short amount of time. Before I do that, I thought I would mention the fact that way back, here's your novels, historical novels that became very popular. Because to me, she died not long ago. I think she was a South African, Mary Renault. But all those years ago, she wrote a series of novels about Alexander and his supposed male lover. This became, in, I guess, certain circles, very, very popular, and I use it merely to illustrate the many differing views that there have been over the years of Alexander and his life. Now again, this is a very difficult thing to prove or disprove, but apparently she felt she had some reason to believe it, and so, but perhaps some of you, are you all familiar with these novels at all from the time? I'm getting some yeses and some no's. So, well, that was a long time ago, and I'm sure you were studying or doing something. You had no time to read novels. You were engaged in constructive reading in the library. While the more, but Fire from Heaven and The Persian Boy in the late 60s and early 70s. And again, one view of Alexander. More significantly, of course, and everyone knows it, the love of the horse. And who could ever forget that? When there were domestic problems with mom and dad, and I'm sure there were plenty of them, if you'd had a pair like that, there was always Bucephalus. And the tales that we are told in Plutarch of how he subdued Bucephalus and how he loved him will be part of the Alexander legend. And to prove the love, he named one of the cities after the horse. That's right. Most of the cities were, surprise, named Alexandria. But he did take out, you know, it's kind of like Flickerville or something like that. It's just, you want to make sure that you honor your horse. That's very, very important. And so the story of Bucephalus is one that must be made. But meanwhile, he was reared in the tradition of military success, and he was a commander for his father at the age of 19, which is just unbelievable to me that he was entrusted with that much authority. Again, the relationship with the father was difficult, especially because his father had moved on to another woman, and there was another son, and I guess some people would whisper that Alexander was a half-breed or that kind of thing. And so there are all kinds of issues like that. But we do know, as these sort of illustrations show, that he did have equestrian skills, and we know he had military skills. But we also know that he was well educated. I have mentioned already the Macedonian background of Aristotle. And Aristotle, like many people engaged in the teaching profession, will take a gig wherever they can get it and not ask a lot of questions. And this seems to be true for Aristotle, that he journeyed all the way there. It is not true that he became Alexander's exclusive teacher. There were many others. But it is to note that Aristotle was a major teacher of Alexander. I am sure they had very differing ideas, whether Alexander talked back to him. I don't know. I would be a little afraid to sass Aristotle, you know, because we learned, remember, about one of the greatest minds in all of history. But, you know, Aristotle always said that from the point of view of logic and reason, the city-state, the polis, was the most perfect form of government that could exist. And for someone with the mind of this young man, I don't think that's going to hold any water, because he's going to say, yeah, right, Pops. We're moving on. No polis for me. But whatever the case, Aristotle would turn out to be, I think, a major influence in terms of the short life that Alexander would have had. I know that he had many experiences with philosophers and individuals who led other schools of thought. I'm going to tell some of the stories about them later on, so I'll save that. But more or less, this is not that we ever think of Alexander as being merely a soldier or an individual who knows nothing of the mind. He was Greek, and in many ways, his idea is spreading our Greek ways to the rest of the world. Was that his primary motive? I doubt it. But could it have been one? Yes. So let's just say he had multiple motives. Because remember, Aristotle, like so many of the Greeks, most of them, as far as I can tell in classical times, were not in any sense willing to admit that other cultures and civilizations were equal. It's like, you got a lot to learn from us, and we're willing to share, but we have nothing to learn from you. You're just lucky to have us. Because you're barbarians and we're not. You know, that kind of thing. Darius III. Remember that old song we used to sing in school, The Old Gray Mare, She Ain't What She Used to Be? Well, I guess I could sing that about the Persian Empire. It's been real. We've had some good times, but yeah, this is not the place to talk about the woes of the Persian Empire. But let's just say they remember the good old days of Cyrus and Xerxes and Cambyses. Remember when we conquered Egypt? Yeah, that was great. Long time ago. And I'm not sure that the Persians were the most popular people to rule an empire. It's hard, you know, RateMyConquerors.com, it's hard to imagine that there are a lot of imperial rulers who get a lot of high marks. Oh, you're wonderful. We're so thankful that you took us over. Yeah, I mean, how many times has that happened in history? And particularly in this case, I think the Persians were reaching a point that Egyptians and many others who viewed the Persians, remember, as what we call Johnny-come-latelys. Because remember, Mesopotamians and Egyptians have been around when you were nothing, upstarts. And you telling us, you know, that our kids ought to be taking Persian 101? I don't think so. You know, it's sort of, and then, you know, then you think about your tax money. Because they're going to, you know, Persia's got big bills. We've got military. We've got the Persian roads, which I believe I mentioned before. There's just a lot of expenditures, and the Persian royal family has its problems. So, Darius III is now ruler. He is not the one, by the way, who, after Philip died, was assassinated, took credit for it. That ruler's already been assassinated himself. Yeah, they come, they go. It's been real. This is yet another one. He's like a cousin. And Darius III will have, as you know, a very great name. But as to whether he deserves that name or whether or not he will have a major role in Persian history is yet to be determined. Meanwhile, with Darius III ruling now, Alexander as a young man, and remember, Mama's right there. I'll be with you. I'm going to help you every step of the way, son. That kind of thing. So, the Macedonians, and indeed, major members of this League of Corinth are going to think, well, here's some kid, 19, 20 years old, and do we really have to worry about him? So there will be a period in which there will be some dissent, shall we call it that. He said, you know, I hate to do this, but sometimes, you know, they just need to see what happens when you're naughty. But rather than a time out, he will raise one city, R-A-Z-E, kill all the men, and sell all the women and children into slavery. And he says, now, are there any other questions about... And they say, no, we love the League of Corinth. Where do we send in our contribution? You know, that's the guy. It's a terror operation, but he says, you know, all of this will prove to be valuable. You'll be glad you did this. And again, we do the, how much do you hate Persia? And, you know, that always brings people back to saying, you know, you're right. We're sorry we disagreed. It was wrong. So, all of this is what I've called a crusading mentality. And again, if his mother said that he probably was a divine product, he no doubt has divine characteristics. And his identification with Achilles is something we hear in Alexander's stories over and over again. He can't wait to get to, supposedly, Achilles' grave. And you think, I wonder about that. Yeah, I do too. But that's the story that we have because he identifies with Achilles as part of his mother's family. And remember, his supposed father, or maybe we just call him stepdad, since we're now thinking Thunderbolt, that he was descended from Hercules, so we can claim all the big stars, you know, from the past. So, it all starts marvelously. He will arrive in what today is Western Asia, Turkey, Asia Minor, and those are Persian-dominated Greek states. And what are they going to do? Well, those satraps, you know, the Persian leaders in the local areas, are going to get the heck out of town. Because what are those folks going to say? They're going to say, oh, we love you, Alexander. Welcome. It's great to have you. Go Greek. You know, that kind of thing. God, we hate those Persians. You know, think the summer of 44 Paris. I mean, we know when to change over. It's like they were very, very open to Alexander. And, of course, this brings on the story of the cutting of the Gordian knot, another famous story of Alexander. And the phrase, thinking outside the box, which I had never heard before, which I always find fascinating, that you simply cut through the knot in there, and voila. Whatever the case, this initial campaign should not be thought of as a difficult one because Philip was already on the way to accomplishing this very task, the task of taking over those Greeks who had been dominated by the Persians, because they were ready for liberation. The fact is, though, that as we move on, there will be other problems. This battle in 334, do you see up here this, this Granicus River right up here, right here. And that battle will be held in what is a great victory, and I don't think Darius III or the Persians were shocked or overwhelmed or in great fear at that point, because look where you are. If you want to go back to maybe October of 2017 and remember when we talked about King Midas or the Croesus of Lydia, the Lydian kingdom, and how it came to be dominated by Cyrus. This is a clear-cut case of areas that were not Persian. much of it had been Greek. So they were thrilled in many ways to find themselves taken by Greeks. But the story goes on. Let's go back, if I may, to note that after that, he ended up, and as you see where he's going now, in modern terms, he would be going into southern Turkey, wouldn't he? And then as he is moving over to Issus, you can assume, I think I'm right in saying you are way down in southern Turkey or northern Syria in that particular area. This was going to be a very major confrontation. The Persians were determined at this point, and when I say Persians, you know I'm talking about a cast of thousands with Egyptians and a variety of other peoples who have been forced into Persian military service. And if you want to know the truth, they actually had Greek mercenaries fighting for them. So, in any event, there was a large force. And it was so large that we know, in fact, that Darius III was convinced that, you know how you want to show off? You want it when your family, you love it when things are going right. You want to have your family with you. So he brought his mother. That's right. He brought his wife and his daughters. He said, wait till y'all see. We're going to hurt some Greeks. And they're going, go, son. We're so proud of you. Gee, Dad. You know, that kind of thing. So it is an interesting tale, this Battle of Issus, because, of course, it will be a disappointment. He will be defeated, and this, of course, this Battle of Issus is now out of what we would call Greek territory. We can no longer say in any way, shape, or form that Alexander is attacking or fighting with him, Darius III, in an area that was necessarily sympathetic with Greeks or Macedonians. So, what will happen at this stage? Well, Darius III will make a run for it, as they say, flee to the east, and oddly, some of us might think, Alexander will decide to go south to liberate that area that now we would refer to as Syria, Lebanon, Israel, and into Egypt. This Siwasawa was an oasis. And the story is that after apparently agreeing on the foundations for what will become one of the greatest cities of the Hellenistic world, Alexandria, Egypt, he will go all the way to, I guess you would say, the center of Egyptian religion, where the priests of the pharaoh, traditional pharaoh, lived. And that was way over here in an oasis. And you'd say, Alexander was on a rather busy schedule. Why did he go all the way over here? Well, you see the priest there in the background going, son, we're so glad you're here. And you say, gee, do you think someone gave them an advance warning? Yes. I think, you got your retirement to think about. You got all of your benefits. Yeah, so they said, we wondered when you were coming. Your dad loves you very much. Thunderbolt. And say, you can call him Zeus, but we call him Ammon. He said, I always wondered, Mama always did think, that I was a special child. So, this is where things really get interesting after he has this little Egyptian encounter. This seems to confirm his feelings about his own semi-divinity. And it may change his attitude, and it certainly changes the attitude of those around him, because remember, up until this point, he has been treated by Greeks and Macedonians as a human being. Regular guy. A special regular guy, but a special guy. And now he's beginning to say, you do realize who I am. And don't you want to start kneeling? Exactly. When I walk in, how about some foot kissing? Would you like that? Because remember who I am? Because they have all kind of rituals for the Egyptian pharaoh, or even a Persian king for that matter. And they think, we've got problems. I think it's a little late for counseling. So what are we going to do with him? Here we are over in Egypt. Talk about a bad, bad dose of megalomania, huh? It's a problem. But then this whole oasis business will become interesting. How you like this? Do you notice some of the special effects with the blueprints, the planning, and, of course, the inevitable fluttering beings who show us that this is no ordinary city, okay? This is going to be Alexandria. And as I say, Alexandria, in many respects, will be the capital of the Hellenistic world. There are many other great cities in that particular world, but this will become one of the greatest of all. After he concludes his divinity experience, they will go back northward. And I think it's fair to say that we are already in the stage, because remember, these people who are fighting with him, they obviously are going to have casualties. We have to have new individuals to fight for us, and I expect that there will be a variety of other forces that will be joining them. Call them collaborators if you wish, but I think many of them probably knew the handwriting was on the wall, if I can borrow that expression. And this will be a time when, if I were Darius III, I would have been thinking about a comfortable exile. Maybe doing something and just accepting the fact that you lost. He had already tried to negotiate with Alexander and say, I really admired you. How would you like to be my son-in-law? Yeah, you could be my son-in-law. We have great family times, and, it'd be fun. I just think the Greeks are great, and all this. And then maybe you could have half of it. You could have everything west of the Tigris Euphrates. Isn't that good? And one of his generals said, if I were Alexander, I would accept that. And Alexander looked at him and said, if I were you, I would too. But, Yeah. Hey, I'm Alexander, and you're not. So, all of this leads us to this. Do you see it up there in Assyria? Right there. Right up there. See, here's the Tigris Euphrates. He's crossed over here, Gargamel. Right up there. And this will be the last hand of Darius III. With whatever forces he had remaining, they will be defeated. And it's interesting to think, if you ever say, whatever happened to Darius III, I'm sure he did wonder, gee, maybe I should have thought about exile, because now a man who has been essentially bereft of everything will escape from that losing battle with a few major forces, and one of his old satraps, assistants, will accompany him and say, boss, you're really a loser, and we've had some good times, but now it's time for you to die. So he kills him, thinking that when Alexander catches up, Alexander will say, well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. I wanted him dead. But in fact, he didn't. I think he wanted to kill him himself. And so he gets right irritated. And so he kills him. Yeah, it's a strange story, but Darius III does not end up happily. He ends up in this way because Alexander is on a roll. And it seems he has the momentum. Now, if you're wondering what's going on back at home, well, everybody loves a winner. And I'm thinking that as time goes on, they simply send back word of their successes and perhaps various accoutrements of victory from Persian territories, once Persian territories, that Alexander has conquered. Is this a stop? No. It's to go on. And to go on, and you notice the year 330, and so it is going to be over and over again a case of you don't know how to stop and enjoy what you have. This is truly the problem. When the body of Darius III is there, well, he's gone now. And the Persians are all going to go, oh, Alexander, you're so wonderful. We made such a mistake by supporting this loser. But now we love you. We've changed our minds completely. He said, well, I love you too. Do you? Yes, I do. Because I'm all into reconciliation. Where there was war, let there be peace. Give me a hug. What's going on here? Well, the Greeks started wondering that. And Plutarch, when he was younger, was writing about Alexander was essentially going to create one nation of humanity. I'm sorry I had to kill those people because I really loved them. But it's like to keep peace, I had to make war, and now there should be no more war. Just everybody should love. If you say, as we used to in our youth, there's a credibility gap, yes, I think I would have a big one. But he did try to make certain actions. Now, using Persian court ritual was not popular among Greeks, nor was the talk about me and my dad, Zeus, because he just, and they just said, But then, when some of his major advisors and so forth were just talking to him, they said, didn't you forget something? And they said, what's that? And said, well, you know, there is a little ritual now you need to be doing. They were dressing. He was trying to get them to dress like Persians. Do you want to call it Persian philia? Yes, there is something of that. Because it's like we were Macedonians, and that was nice, but being Persians is even better, somehow. It's hard. I mean, you could just imagine, think of his dreams. Wouldn't it be interesting? Dr. Freud and Alexander the Great, you think about that? Did you really love your mother? How do you feel about Thunderbolt? Or how do you feel about, do you really love the Persians? You know, and there's so many questions to ask about Alexander and his thinking. But we do know that at some point there will be a mass wedding, and that must have been a doozy. All of these Greeks, there will be a mass ceremony. Do you remember that mass wedding? I think it was sort of on television in New York, the Moonies. That was wild, wasn't it? And this is on that order. You have these hundreds of Greek men. And you say, well, what about their families back home? Well, they'll be there. But right now, this is all for politics. Okay? We are just trying, we love Alexander. Alexander feels we need to get married. And you marry according to your rank, I think. If, you know, depending on whether you're a Greek officer, and then you marry someone from the Persian aristocracy. And apparently the fathers of these women thought that that would help advance their family interests, because when you were losers, you have to think about what's going on. Now, what's Alexander got in mind? Well, according to Plutarch, it's all about a Greco-Persian future, supposedly. And you think, why else would he have done it? Because men and foreign women have been known to get together without the blessings of the marital status, if I may say that. And it is so true that there could be plenty of Greco-Persian babies. I don't think that's a problem. But I think here, he's trying to make this into some sort of permanent legal status, presuming that these men are going to stay in this particular world. This is a depiction of how it would have looked. And he himself married one of the daughters of Darius III. And you think, that must have been weird. Well, and you know what? What are you going to say? You know, maybe when they first, after the ceremony, say, yeah, I wish your dad could have been here. Yeah, but let's just let bygones be bygones. You know, he was a good man, and a little revisionism there, I think, you know, and you got to move on, and now let's make some babies. But as it would turn out, there would be none. At last count, he had 3 wives, and I believe you could say they were all for political reasons, like this one. Now look at how far he goes, and do you see the area called Bactria? Bactria. That's all the way in the east. He continued until finally his Greeks rebelled. They made it into what would be Western Pakistan. And as far as he was concerned, they were almost at the end of the earth. But neither, apparently, Greek or Persian forces were willing to go on. So he turned back establishing his capital at Babylon. He never made it back to Greece. He did marry the daughter of the Bactrian king, which I assume is getting you pretty close into Afghanistan now, because they have found Hellenistic archaeologists some years back found Hellenistic artifacts there. All of this then is to say that for Alexander, it did not end in completeness, but it did end in, as you can see from the land, quite a bit of land which had come under his authority, and I assume he left troops there that would maintain his control. We have to see, however, what he would leave behind, because he would die so very young. But not only what he left behind politically would be important, but more significantly, how this would cause the spreading of classical Greek civilization. Thank you for your attention this afternoon, and I hope to see you next week.